There is a man in the room. He doesn't speak the most. He doesn't dress the loudest. He doesn't fight for attention or position or airtime. But the moment he walks in, something shifts. The energy reorganizes itself around him. Conversations quiet a half degree. Posture straightens. People lean in. They're not sure why. He hasn't said anything yet. He may not say much at all. But there is something about his presence, something in the stillness behind his eyes, something in the unhurried way he moves, something in the absolute absence of desperation in his demeanor, that commands the room without demanding it. You've seen this man. Maybe once. Maybe you see him every day and have spent years trying to understand what he has that you don't. It isn't his money. It isn't his title. It isn't luck or genetics or some unfair advantage handed to him before the game started. It is something far more deliberate, far more ancient, far more earned. And today, on Inner Steel, we are going to break it down, behavior by behavior, story by story, layer by layer, so that by the time this video ends, you will understand exactly, precisely, and completely what separates the man who commands respect from the one who endlessly, exhaustingly chases it. If this is the kind of content that sharpens you, that challenges you to hold yourself to a higher standard, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. Don't wait. This channel is built for the man who is serious, not just curious, but serious, about becoming something worth becoming. Hit that subscribe button. Then let's get into it. Behavior 1. He controls what most men cannot, his reaction. In 1944, a man was stripped of everything. His name was Viktor Frankl. Austrian psychiatrist. Intellectual. Husband. The kind of man whose mind was his most prized possession, who had spent decades building a framework for understanding human psychology and the nature of meaning. The Nazis took his manuscript, years of work, a lifetime of thought committed to paper, when they marched him through the gates of Auschwitz. They took his clothes and gave him rags. They took his name and replaced it with a number tattooed on his forearm. They took his wife Tilly, who would die at Bergen-Belsen before the war ended, before he ever had the chance to find her. They took everything a man could have stripped from him. And then they discovered, to their astonishment, that there was something they could not take. In the camp, guards had total, unchallenged power over Frankl's body. They could beat him, starve him, march him in the cold until his feet bled through his boots, work him until his hands shook from exhaustion. They could threaten him, humiliate him, make every waking hour a demonstration of their dominance. What they could not do, what no man, no system, no instrument of cruelty could ever reach, was step inside him and choose his response for him. Frankl wrote later, in his landmark work Man's Search for Meaning, that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies a human being's last, inalienable freedom, the freedom to choose how they respond. He watched men in the camps who had lost everything, their families, their health, their futures, still walk through the barracks at night offering their last piece of bread to a stranger. He watched others with more resources, more connections, more physical strength become hollow and cruel and morally collapsed within weeks. The difference was not their circumstances. The difference was what they chose to do with those circumstances. The difference was the response. This is the first behavior that makes people respect you without you ever opening your mouth. Most men are reactive. They have never examined this about themselves, which is exactly the problem. Something happens and they move without thinking from event to emotion to explosive action, like a ball rolling downhill. Someone says something cutting at a dinner table and they flare. Someone questions their competence in a meeting and they crumble, or combust. Someone sends a message that pushes the wrong button and they respond immediately, viciously, at 10 times the appropriate force. Their internal temperature tracks the external environment like a thermometer, rising and falling based on whatever is happening around them. They are, in every meaningful sense, controlled. Not by themselves. By whatever just happened to them 3 seconds ago. The man who commands respect operates in a different mode. He has done the work, the unglamorous, repetitive, unwitnessed work, to create space between what happens and what he does about it. Something cuts him. He breathes. Something shakes him. He steadies. Someone tries to provoke a reaction they can use against him, tries to bait him into exposing himself, tries to knock him off center. He gives them nothing. Not out of cowardice. Not because he doesn't feel it. But because he has decided, deliberately and in advance, that his responses will be chosen rather than triggered. That he will act from his values, not his nerves. This is not coldness. This is not suppression. The man who suppresses his emotions is not in control. He is running a pressure cooker with no release valve, and eventually it explodes, always at the worst possible moment, always in the direction that damages him most. What we're talking about is something different. It is sovereignty. The decision that what happens inside you will be governed by you, not by circumstance, not by other people's behavior, not by whatever chaos the day has decided to throw in your direction. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his private journal, Meditations, a document he never intended anyone to read, written purely as a discipline of self-examination. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Read that again. This was a man governing an empire of 60 million people. Fighting wars on multiple fronts. Managing senators who wanted him dead, generals who wanted more resources, and a population that would riot at the slightest provocation. Watching plague move through Rome. Watching people he loved suffer and die. He wasn't writing these words to sound philosophical or to perform wisdom for an audience. He was writing them because they were the thread he clung to in the dark. They were the only thing keeping him standing when everything around him was pulling him toward reaction, toward rage, toward the kind of impulsive decision-making that ruins men and dismantles legacies. Emotional regulation is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of expression. The respected man feels everything. He feels the anger when it comes, the fear, the hurt. He does not pretend he is above those things. What he has built, through practice and through discipline, is the capacity to run those feelings through a filter before they become words or actions. He sits with the anger long enough to ask, what does this situation actually require? He waits before sending the message. He sleeps before making the decision. He breathes before speaking. And in that small, unremarkable pause, he makes the choice that separates composed men from demolished ones. Here is what people feel when they are around a man like this, and they may never be able to name it, but they feel it: safety. Deep, instinctive safety. The kind that humans have been programmed for millennia to seek in a leader, in a companion, in any person they are going to trust with something they value. When you are unshakable, people feel safe around you. They know you won't collapse under pressure. They know you won't explode without warning and take everyone around you down with the fallout. They know that when things go wrong, and things always go wrong, you will remain a steady force in the center of the storm. Not pretending the storm isn't happening. Not suppressing your awareness of it. Just steady. Anchored. Choosing your moves with care even as the wind picks up. That quality, that steadiness under fire, is astonishingly rare. And rare things are respected. Automatically. Instinctively. In a way that no amount of clever presentation or reputation management can manufacture. Begin training this behavior today. The next time something unsettles you, the next time you feel that familiar surge of heat behind your eyes, that tightness in your chest, that impulse to fire back immediately, do not react for 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. Sit with the feeling. Breathe through it. Let the wave rise and begin to fall before you do anything. In those 60 seconds, you will often discover that the thing you were about to say didn't need to be said. That the response you were about to send would have done more damage to you than to anyone else. That the moment didn't actually require your explosion, only your presence. Start there. 60 seconds. Do it every time. Watch what it builds over months and years. Behavior 2. He means what he says, and says only what he means. There is a story about a Japanese swordsmith named Masamune. In feudal Japan, the swordsmith was not simply a craftsman. He was considered something closer to a priest, a man whose work stood at the intersection of skill and spirit, whose output would be carried into battle by men whose lives depended on the quality of what he made. The blade was not merely a weapon. It was a reflection of the man who created it. Every imperfection in the steel, every flaw in the edge, every deviation from perfect balance was a comment on the character of its maker. The great smiths were judged not only on their technique but on the alignment between what they promised and what they delivered. Masamune is regarded, even centuries after his death, as the greatest swordsmith Japan ever produced. His blades were so extraordinary in their craftsmanship that they became national treasures, passed down through generations of warriors and emperors. But there was something else Masamune was known for, something smaller and quieter and, in many ways, more important. When Masamune said a blade would be ready on a certain day, it was ready. When he said the work was completed, it was completed. Not nearly done. Not mostly there. Not just a few more days. Done. Exactly as he said. His word was a contract he made with himself before it became a commitment to anyone else, and he held to it with the same precision he brought to the steel. Lords and warriors did not travel across Japan merely for the quality of his blades, though the quality was unmatched. They traveled because they trusted the man who made them. Because in a world full of craftsmen who made promises they softened when circumstances changed, Masamune had built something more valuable than a reputation for skill. He had built a reputation for truth. This is the second behavior. The devaluation of the spoken word is one of the great quiet catastrophes of our time. We live inside a culture of casual commitment, promises made and dissolved with barely a second thought, deadlines treated as suggestions. I'll be there, offered as filler rather than fact. Most people have unconsciously trained themselves to understand that words are not really binding, that what matters is intention, that meaning to do something is more or less the same as doing it. It is not. It has never been. The gap between intending and doing is the exact space where trust lives or dies. The respected man understands that every word he speaks is a small test of his character. Not a large, dramatic test. A small one. When he says he will call at 3, he calls at 3. When he tells someone he will be there, he is there. When he gives his assessment of something, that assessment is honest and considered, not adjusted for the comfort of the person receiving it. When he says he will deliver, he delivers. And on the occasions when the unexpected intervenes, because life is unpredictable and sometimes it intervenes, he communicates before he disappears. Before the deadline passes. Before the other person is left standing somewhere holding a commitment that has quietly evaporated. He does not vanish and reappear with an explanation after the damage is done. He respects people enough to tell them when he cannot do what he said he would, and he does it in time for them to make other arrangements. This behavior also operates in the other direction, and this is where most men fail to understand it fully. The man who commands respect does not say things he does not mean. He does not offer compliments he doesn't believe to smooth over uncomfortable silences. He does not agree with positions he finds questionable simply because agreement is easier in the moment. He does not manufacture enthusiasm he doesn't feel in order to seem more likable. He speaks less than most men, noticeably less, in many cases, but what he speaks carries a weight that chatty men never achieve, because the people around him have learned, through accumulated experience, that when he opens his mouth, something true is coming out. They don't have to filter it. They don't have to interpret it or wonder what he really meant beneath the politeness. He says what he means. He means what he says. Seneca wrote, in one of his letters to Lucilius, words that have survived 2,000 years. Let your words be few and your deeds be many. This is not a call to silence for its own sake. This is not a recommendation to become mysterious or withholding. It is a call to alignment. To close the gap between what you say and what you do until there is no gap left. Until the two things are one thing. The man whose deeds consistently exceed his words, who does more than he promises, who delivers beyond what he committed to, is trusted in a way that the great talker never is. The man whose words consistently exceed his deeds eventually becomes background noise. He may be entertaining. He may even be charming. But he is not respected. Not deeply. Not in the way that lasts. Here is the quiet, cumulative power of this behavior. When your word is genuinely solid, when people know from experience that you do what you say, you never have to remind them. You never have to justify yourself. You never have to manage your reputation with stories about your intentions. Your track record walks into the room ahead of you and does the work. You are trusted before you say a word because the words you've said before have always been true. This is not complicated to understand. It is, however, demanding to practice. Start small. Pick one thing this week, one specific, clear commitment, and honor it with surgical precision. Not approximately. Not mostly. Exactly as you said. Then do it again next week. Stack these small acts of alignment one on top of another. Over months and years, you will have built something that cannot be counterfeited, cannot be destroyed by a rumor, and cannot be taken from you by anyone's opinion, an unbroken record of integrity that speaks more persuasively than any introduction ever could. Behavior 3. He is comfortable alone, and that changes everything. In the summer of 1845, a young man named Henry David Thoreau walked 2 miles outside of Concord, Massachusetts, to a piece of land his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson owned near the edge of Walden Pond. He had borrowed an axe. He cut timber from the surrounding woods. He built, with his own hands, a small cabin, 10 feet by 15, walls chinked against the cold, a fireplace barely large enough to heat it. Then he moved in. He was 27 years old. He was not running from failure. He had options, a Harvard education, connections in the literary world, friends who valued him. He was not broken. He was not on the edge of anything desperate. What he was, and what he had the unusual honesty to name clearly, was quietly becoming someone else. The social pressures of Concord, the expectation to take a job for the money, to marry for convention, to fill his days with approved activities in the approved sequence, were slowly, almost imperceptibly, shaping him into a version of himself that had less and less to do with who he actually was. The crowd was authoring him. And he had noticed it. So he left. For 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, Thoreau lived at Walden. He grew beans in a small field. He walked through the woods daily, studying plants, watching seasons turn. He sat with his thoughts for long, uninterrupted hours. He wrote what would become Walden, which is not a book about nature. It is a book about attention, about what happens when a man stops performing for the world and starts listening to himself. He wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." He returned to Concord a changed man. Not because the woods had handed him answers, but because solitude had stripped away the noise long enough, consistently enough, deeply enough, for him to locate himself beneath it. This is the third behavior, comfort with solitude. The capacity to be genuinely alone without becoming anxious, restless, or defined by the absence of company. Most men, if they examine themselves honestly, are terrified of this. Not in an obvious way. The fear rarely announces itself. It shows up in behavior, the reflexive reach for the phone in any moment of stillness. The need for background noise, music, television, a podcast, whenever the room goes quiet. The constant social scheduling that leaves no real gaps in the calendar. The inability to sit with a meal or a coffee without something to scroll through, something to look at, something to fill the space where silence would otherwise live. Watch the behavior, and you see the fear. The fear of being left alone with the one person you cannot escape, yourself. This is not a small problem. The man who cannot sit with himself is a man who does not know himself. And the man who does not know himself can be given an identity by whoever happens to be most confident about telling him who he is. He is malleable in the worst way. He can be flattered into positions he doesn't actually hold. He can be pressured into decisions that violate his own values because he has never sat quietly long enough to know what those values actually are. He is, in the deepest sense, homeless inside himself. Always looking for somewhere to land, something to belong to, someone to tell him that he is enough. The respected man has done the thing most men avoid. He has sat with himself, in real silence, without a phone, without distraction, without the comfortable noise of other people's presence, long enough to know who he is. He has confronted the things in himself that he would rather not look at, and has not flinched away from them. He has faced his fears in the privacy of his own mind, and they have become, if not smaller, then at least familiar. Known. No longer capable of ambushing him in public because he has already encountered them in private. And this produces something that no performance, no confidence seminar, no carefully crafted public image can replicate: genuine ease in his own skin. He is not performing relaxation. He is not pretending to be unbothered. He is actually, genuinely at ease with who he is, because he knows who he is with a depth that only solitude can produce. When this man walks into a room, people feel it. They feel that he doesn't need them to be anything for him. He's not leaning on the conversation for identity. He's not extracting validation from the interaction. He is simply present, fully, peacefully present, in the way that only a man who has learned to be present with himself can be. That quality is not simply attractive. It is, in the precise evolutionary sense, gravity. It pulls people in. Because they feel the stability in him that they are still searching for in themselves. Make this investment. Set aside 30 minutes today with no phone, no noise, no input of any kind. Sit with your own thoughts. If journaling helps, write. If silence helps, sit in it. If you need to walk, walk without headphones. Let yourself be alone in the fullest sense of the word. It will be uncomfortable. The mind will resist. Stay anyway. Do this daily. Do it until it becomes the most important 30 minutes in your routine. Do it until you discover what Thoreau discovered, that the most interesting company you will ever keep is your own, once you learn to listen. Behavior 4. He chooses honesty over comfort, every single time. Alexander the Great stood before a man who had nothing to lose. Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire. He had marched his armies through Egypt and named a city after himself. He had pushed east until his soldiers finally refused to go further, so far had they traveled from home. At the height of his power, he was arguably the most dominant military force in the history of the ancient world. Generals cowered before him. Kings sent tribute rather than face him on a battlefield. His own men, who loved him, were also terrified of him. He had heard of a philosopher named Diogenes who lived in Corinth, a man who had abandoned every comfort civilization offered and made his home in a ceramic jar, who owned nothing, wanted nothing, and was impressed by no one. The stories painted Diogenes as a man so completely unbothered by the opinions of others that he had become something of a legend. Alexander, who was as curious as he was ambitious, went to see for himself. He found Diogenes lying in the sun outside the city. He walked up to him with his full retinue, soldiers, advisors, attendants, the visible machinery of empire, and stood over the philosopher with the kind of presence that was supposed to make men shrink. "I am Alexander," he said, "the greatest king in the world. Ask anything of me and I will give it." Diogenes squinted up at him. "Yes," he said without changing his posture. "Move. You're standing in my sunlight." The men around Alexander went rigid. This was not a response that anyone gave Alexander. This was not how things worked when you were talking to a man who had the practical capability to have you removed from the world before sundown. Everyone waited. Alexander was silent for a long moment. And then he laughed. Not nervously. Not performatively. Genuinely. He turned to his men and said, and this was widely recorded by writers of the period, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." What did the conqueror recognize in the philosopher who owned nothing and needed nothing? He recognized a man who could not be bought, flattered, or intimidated into false agreement. He recognized a man whose words were always true because he had no investment in your approval, no reputation to protect by telling you what you wanted to hear, no position to guard by going along with what you already believed. In a world full of people competing to agree with Alexander, Diogenes was a shock of cold water. And Alexander, whatever his considerable flaws, was wise enough to understand that cold water is worth more than flattery. This is the fourth behavior. Not just honesty. Consistent, unafraid, unconditional honesty. We live inside a performance. Most people, most educated, sophisticated, otherwise thoughtful people, have learned to manage their words so carefully that what comes out bears only a partial relationship to what they actually think. They say, "Great idea," when they mean, "I'm not sure about that." They say, "I'll think about it," when they mean no. They agree in meetings and disagree in hallways. They tell their friends what they want to hear and tell themselves they're being kind. They soften every observation until the truth at the center of it disappears. They have been trained by 100 small social consequences to understand that telling the complete truth is expensive, that it creates friction, that it risks displeasure, that it makes certain kinds of relationships difficult to maintain. And they are not entirely wrong. Honesty does cost something. There are relationships that require careful management. There are situations where the full, unfiltered truth would do more harm than good. The respected man understands this. He is not Diogenes in a corporate meeting. He is not brutally frank without regard for the human being in front of him. There is a version of honesty that is simply cruelty dressed in respectable clothing, the person who delivers painful observations under the banner of just being real, when what they're actually doing is enjoying the wound. That is not what this is. What this is something more deliberate. The respected man has made a fundamental decision: his words will be true. He will not manufacture agreement he doesn't feel. He will not offer praise he doesn't mean. He will not tell you your plan is solid if he can see the flaw in it, because that would be a disservice to you dressed up as kindness. He will find a way to say the difficult thing with care and respect for the person receiving it. He will choose his timing thoughtfully, his language carefully, his approach considerately. But at the end of all that care and consideration, he will say the true thing. The actual thing. The thing that serves you, even if it doesn't please you. And because of this, because people around him have come to understand through experience that his words are not managed for their consumption, that what he says reflects what he genuinely thinks, his words carry a weight that most people's words simply don't. When he offers encouragement, you believe it, because you know he would have told you if he didn't think you were ready. When he raises a concern, you take it seriously, because you know he's not doing it to protect himself or to manage his own comfort. When he tells you that something you've built is genuinely good, that observation means something. It means something because everything he says means something. Because none of it is performance. The people who have been on the receiving end of this man's honesty often describe something they didn't expect: gratitude. Not always in the moment. Sometimes weeks later. Sometimes in a conversation that begins, "I've been thinking about what you said, and I didn't want to hear it then, but you were right." That is the moment respect deepens into something permanent. That is the moment you become not just someone people enjoy knowing, but someone they genuinely need, someone who will tell them the truth when everyone else is managing them. Subscribe to Inner Steel if you want to keep building this. Every week we go deeper on what it actually takes to become a man that others trust without being told to. Hit subscribe now and don't miss it. Practice one honest conversation this week. Find the thing you have been softening, the observation you have been holding back, the truth you have been qualifying into meaninglessness. Then say it. With care. With respect. With genuine concern for the person receiving it. But say it fully. Say it without the hedge at the end that takes back everything you just offered. Watch what it does to the quality of that relationship. Watch what it does to the way you feel about yourself. Behavior 5. He is the same man in every room. There is something about Abraham Lincoln that his contemporaries found almost impossible to explain, and that historians have spent decades trying to account for. Lincoln governed during the most catastrophic period in American history. The Civil War was tearing the country apart, not just politically and militarily, but in the way that wars always do, at the level of individual families, individual choices, individual moral reckonings. Lincoln himself was under a pressure that is almost incomprehensible, making decisions that he knew were sending men to die, managing a cabinet that included people who privately thought they should be president instead of him, reading newspapers that called him everything from a tyrant to an imbecile to, in some of the more creative language of the period, a baboon. Generals ignored his strategic input. Politicians questioned his legitimacy. His own party fractured over his decisions. He grieved the death of his son Willie in the White House while managing a war. A senator who came to visit Lincoln during the worst of the war years wrote in his diary that he went expecting to find a man either bloated with the power of the office or destroyed by the weight of it. What he found was Lincoln telling jokes to a small group of aides. Not performing cheerfulness. Not projecting a carefully managed image of a leader who was handling things well. Just telling jokes. Being himself. Comfortable in his own skin in a way that made no sense given everything happening around him. The senator wrote that Lincoln was the strangest man he had ever met. And by strangest, he did not mean peculiar. He meant consistent. Lincoln before a crowd of thousands was the same Lincoln alone in his study at midnight. Lincoln in a moment of victory was the same Lincoln in a moment of devastating defeat. Lincoln with his closest friends and Lincoln with his most hostile political enemies were, to the genuine bewilderment of nearly everyone who encountered him across contexts, the same man. There was no gap between the performance and the person. He had no performance. He simply was what he was, in every room, under every set of circumstances, with every kind of audience. This is the fifth behavior. And it may be the rarest quality on this list. Look at the people around you. Really look. Not at what they say about themselves, but at how they behave across contexts. Most people, most otherwise decent, functional, well-intentioned people, operate with multiple versions of themselves running simultaneously. There is the version that exists with authority figures, careful, deferential, slightly smaller than they actually are. There is the version with people they perceive as beneath them, a little more expansive, a little less patient, a little more willing to be casually dismissive. There is the version for first dates and interviews and first impressions, curated, polished, assembled with care. There is the private version, sometimes remarkably different from the public one. They are not consciously dishonest. They are simply doing what social animals do, calibrating their presentation to their environment, reading the room, figuring out who they need to be for this particular audience. But here is what this costs. Every time you shift your version for a room, you spend a fragment of yourself maintaining the shift. Every time you adjust your opinions for the people you're with, you lose contact, slightly, with what you actually believe. Over time, if the adjustments are frequent enough and significant enough, you lose track of the original. You cannot reliably answer the question, "What do I actually think about this?" because the answer has been adjusted so many times for so many rooms that the authentic version is buried under layers of social calibration. You have become a sophisticated, responsive, people-pleasing stranger to yourself. The respected man has refused this bargain. He has decided, at some point, in some quiet reckoning, that there will be one version of himself, and that version will show up everywhere. With the CEO and the custodian. In victory and in failure. With his family at the end of a hard day and with strangers at the beginning of an important meeting. In private, where the only audience is his own conscience, and in public, where many eyes are watching. The same man. Always. Not because the social calibration wouldn't be easier or more strategically useful, sometimes it would be, but because he has made a commitment to structural integrity that he values more than strategic advantage. Epictetus was born into slavery. He had nothing, not his freedom, not his property, not control over what happened to his body. He eventually gained his freedom and became one of the most influential teachers of Stoic philosophy in the ancient world, running a school in Nicopolis that attracted students from across the empire. And what did he teach, this man who had experienced the most radical version of powerlessness that a human being can experience? He taught that character was the one thing that could not be taken. That the inner life, its consistency, its integrity, its alignment between what you believe and how you behave, was the only true domain of freedom available to any person in any circumstances. He wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Not figure out who this room needs you to be. Not read the audience and perform accordingly. Decide who you are. Then be that person. In this room. In the next one. In the one after that. Without adjustment, without performance, without the subtle shape-shifting that most people don't even notice themselves doing. What does this produce in the people around you? Something that almost no amount of talent, success, or charm can generate on its own. It produces trust. Not the provisional trust that you extend to someone who seems good, but the deep, bedrock trust that comes from having seen a person in enough different contexts, under enough different pressures, in enough unguarded moments, to know what they are actually made of. When you know that someone is the same in the dark as they are in the light, when you have seen them be honest even when dishonesty would have been easier, be steady even when collapse would have been understandable, be generous even when no one was watching, that is when something settles in your assessment of them that cannot be dislodged by rumors, bad days, or other people's opinions. This is the work of a lifetime. It is not a technique you can pick up in a weekend and deploy in a meeting on Monday. It is the cumulative result of hundreds of small choices. The choice to say what you think when it would be easier to go along, to hold your ground when it would be more comfortable to shift, to show up in private exactly the same way you show up when someone is taking notes. It builds slowly, imperceptibly, the way a great wall builds, one stone at a time, in all weather, until one day you step back and see something that could not be knocked down with a single push. The next time you catch yourself adjusting, softening an opinion because this particular audience might not like it, performing an enthusiasm you don't feel, showing a version of yourself engineered for the preferences of the people in front of you, stop. Not with judgment. With curiosity. Ask yourself, what would I say if I were simply being honest? What would I do if I were simply being myself? Then do that. Every time you choose the consistent version over the convenient one, you add another stone. Every time you trust your own voice over the room's expectations, you build. And over years, over decades, you become something that most people can identify but very few can explain. A man who walks into rooms and changes the air, not because of what he's doing but because of what he is. Closing. 5 behaviors. Not tactics. Not tricks to deploy until someone stops watching. Not a system you implement for a few weeks and abandon when the novelty wears off. Emotional sovereignty. A word that carries weight. Comfort with solitude. Radical, uncompromising honesty. Seamless, unperformed consistency. These are not qualities you are born with. They are not gifts handed to certain men and withheld from others. They are built. That is the thing most people don't want to hear, because built means slow. Built means unglamorous. Built means 1,000 small moments when you make the right choice and no one knows but you, and you do it anyway. Built means that the work happens primarily in private, in the ordinary days when nothing important seems to be at stake, before you ever find yourself in a situation where these qualities will actually be tested. The man who walks into a room and changes it without opening his mouth did not become that man overnight. He became it the morning he decided to pause before reacting when it would have been easier to explode. He became it the afternoon he kept a small promise he made to himself, when no one would have known if he'd broken it. He became it the evening he sat in silence with his own thoughts instead of reaching for distraction. He became it in the hundreds of small, unwitnessed moments when being who he had decided to be was harder than being who it would have been convenient to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in those private pages he never meant for any eyes but his own, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not, plan to be one. Not, think carefully about what that would look like. Not, have a strategy for becoming one that you'll start implementing when the conditions are more favorable. Be one. Now. In this moment. With what is in front of you. With the circumstances you actually have rather than the ideal circumstances you would prefer. You already know who you want to become. You have always known. The question has never been knowledge, it has always been will. The decision to act on what you already know, today, when it's inconvenient. The decision to do the harder thing when the easier thing is right there and would cost you nothing in the short term. The decision to be the man in the dark that you claim to be in the light, not for an audience, not for a reputation, but because integrity is its own reward, and because the man who lives in alignment with his values sleeps in a way that no amount of success without character can buy. This is the work. It was always the work. There are no shortcuts on this particular road. If this video found you at the right moment, if something in it sharpened something in you, reminded you of something you had been letting slide, or gave language to something you had been sensing but couldn't name, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. This channel exists for men who have decided to take themselves seriously. Not arrogantly. Not pretentiously. Seriously. Who have decided that who they are becoming matters more than how they are appearing. Every week, we go deep on the philosophy, the history, the practical discipline of building that kind of character from the inside out. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of these 5 behaviors you are currently working on most. Not which one you have mastered. Which one is hardest. Which one you are still fighting with. That conversation matters here. We'll see you in the next one. Stay hard. Stay sharp. Stay Inner Steel.